The fluorescent lights of the hotel restaurant hummed with a low, headache-inducing buzz that seemed to drill right into Maria's temples. It was 7 in the evening, the busiest time of the dinner rush, and she had already been on her feet for 6 hours straight. Her black work shoes, usually reliable, were pinching her toes. And every step she took sent a sharp little reminder up her leg that she wasn't as young as she used to be. She wiped her forehead with the back of her hand, careful not to smudge her eyeliner, and grabbed a pot of coffee from the warmer. The restaurant was packed. It was that kind of crowd where everyone seemed to be talking at once. The noise level, a chaotic mix of clattering silverware, loud laughter, and the constant beep of the kitchen printer. Maria moved through the tables like a ghost, forcing a smile onto her face, even though her cheeks hurt from the effort. "Table 4 needs refills," the chef yelled from the pass, his voice gruff over the din of the kitchen. On it, Maria mumbled to herself. Though she was the only one who heard, she navigated the tight maze of tables, balancing the heavy coffee pot in one hand and a stack of dirty plates in the other. As she cleared off a booth where a family of 4 had just left a mess of crumbs and napkins, her eyes wandered to the small tip left on the table. It was a $1 bill, tucked under a used sugar packet. She sighed, a sound that started in her chest and ended in a heavy exhale. "Oh!" After an hour of taking orders for expensive steaks and fish, that was her reward. She shoved the dollar into her apron pocket. It joined a few crumpled bills and some loose change, the total sum of her earnings for the night so far. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. Maria's mind began to drift to the list of bills sitting on her kitchen counter at home. The electric bill was past due, the red letter with the final notice stamp glaring at her every time she walked past. The rent was due in 3 days, and her bank account balance was terrifyingly low. She had done the math that morning while eating a piece of dry toast for breakfast. She needed to make at least $100 in tips tonight just to keep the lights on. She looked around the crowded room. Judging by the tips so far, the lights were going to be going out very soon. A heavy feeling of dread settled in her stomach. Mixing with the hunger pang she had been ignoring since lunch, she grabbed a glass of water from the server station and drank it quickly, hoping it would fill the void. It didn't. Maria knew table in the back corner. The hostess, a young girl named Jessica, called out. "They look like they've been waiting a while." Maria nodded, grabbing a menu and a pad of paper. She smoothed out her uniform, tried to make her tired eyes look bright, headed toward the back of the restaurant. As she walked toward the corner booth, she noticed the family that had just sat down. It was a mother and father, looking tired and worn, with a young boy and a little girl who looked to be about 5 and 7 years old. They stood out from the usual crowd. Most of the people in this hotel restaurant were business travelers in sharp suits or tourists in bright vacation clothes, spending money without a second thought. But this family was different. The father wore a jacket that had seen better days. The fabric was shiny at the elbows, and the color had faded from years of washing. The mother had a simple beige sweater on, and she kept her arm wrapped protectively around the little girl's shoulders. The children were quiet, sitting close together, their eyes wide as they took in the fancy surroundings. Maria watched them for a second. She saw the way the father looked at the menu. He didn't look at it with excitement or hunger. He looked at it with calculation, his eyes scanning the prices on the right side of the page before even looking at the food names. He frowned slightly, his thumb rubbing over the edge of the laminated paper. Maria knew that look. She had seen it in the mirror often enough. It was the look of someone doing mental math, trying to figure out how to stretch $10 into a meal for 4 people. She reached the table and put on her best customer service voice. "Good evening," she said warmly. "Welcome. My name is Maria, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you off with something to drink?" The father looked up, his eyes apologetic. "Hi, yes, please. Just water for now, I think. With lemon, if you have it?" "Of course," Maria said. She looked at the mother. "And for you, ma'am?" "Water is fine for me, too. Thank you," the mother said softly. She gave Maria a faint smile, but her eyes looked tired, like she hadn't slept well in weeks. Maria turned to the kids. "And what about you two? Maybe a soda or some juice?" The little boy looked up at his dad, hope lighting up his face. "Can I, Dad?" The father hesitated. He looked at the soda prices on the menu. $3.50 for a small glass. He looked at his wife, who gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head. He looked back at the boy, his expression pained. "I'm sorry, buddy. Water is better for us anyway. We had a long drive." The boy's face fell, but he nodded bravely. "Water is okay?" Maria felt a pang in her chest. She remembered being that kid, wanting a treat she knew her parents couldn't afford. She remembered the feeling of trying to be good so she wouldn't make them feel guilty. "I'll be right back with that water and some lemon," Maria said gently. She walked away to the drink station, her heart heavy. It wasn't just the money, it was the dignity. She could tell they were trying to give their kids a nice experience, perhaps a hot meal in a warm place, after a long time of struggling. But this restaurant, with its hotel prices, wasn't the place for them to do that without breaking the bank. She filled 4 glasses with ice and water. On an impulse, she grabbed a small bowl of fresh lemon wedges and a small bowl of bread rolls from the warmer. She knew she wasn't technically supposed to just give bread away, but the manager was busy in the office, and she didn't care. Her feet ached, her bank account was empty, and she felt a strange kinship with this family. When she returned to the table, she set the waters down and placed the basket of bread in the center. "The kitchen baked a little too much tonight," she lied smoothly, putting on a casual tone. "Would you like some rolls while you decide what to eat?" The father looked at the bread, then up at Maria. For a second, she thought he might cry. His eyes glistened under the harsh lights. That is very kind of you. Thank you. We are pretty hungry." The kids didn't wait for permission. They each reached out and grabbed a roll, tearing into the warm bread. It was the first time they had smiled since walking in. Maria left them to eat, stepping away to give them space. She went back to the service station and leaned against the counter for a moment, watching them from a distance. The father was whispering to the mother, pointing at different items on the menu. She saw him shake his head at the steak prices, his finger moving down to the pasta section, then further down to the soups and salads. The kitchen printer buzzed loudly, snapping Maria out of her thoughts. "Table 7 is up," the chef shouted. Maria pushed away from the counter. She had a job to do. She had other tables to serve, other tips to try to earn, but her mind kept drifting back to the corner booth. She saw the little girl wiping a crumb off the table with her finger and eating it, not letting anything go to waste. It made Maria think about her own situation. She was living paycheck to paycheck, one bad shift away from disaster. She knew the stress of lying awake at night, wondering how she was going to fix her car if it broke down, or how she would buy medicine if she got sick. Seeing this family was like looking into a mirror of her own fears. She walked over to table 7, dropped off the food, and checked on the drinks. The customers there were wealthy, dressed in expensive clothes, and they barely looked at her as she refilled their wine glasses. They left a $20 bill on the table as a tip before she even brought the main course. It was a good tip, but it felt cold. It didn't have the same weight as the gratitude in that father's eyes. Maria went back to the corner booth. The family seemed ready to order. They had pushed the crumbs aside and had their menus closed. The father looked up as she approached. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "Okay," he said, his voice trying to sound confident but wavering slightly. "I think we know what we want." Maria pulled out her pen and paper. She looked at them, really looked at them. She saw the mother's worn hands resting on the table, the father's slumped shoulders, the kids' eager faces, waiting for a signal that it was okay to be happy. "Take your time," Maria said softly. She stood there, waiting, unaware that this simple order was about to change everything for all of them. The air in the restaurant felt thick, buzzing with the unspoken anxiety of money and survival, but Maria stood firm, a silent witness to their struggle. The father cleared his throat, a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the table. He didn't look at the menu again because he had already memorized the only section he could afford. He looked straight at Maria, his eyes trying to project a confidence that wasn't quite there. "Okay," he said, his voice steady but tight. "I think my wife and I will share the chicken Alfredo." Maria nodded, her pen hovering over her order pad. She knew the dish. It was a generous portion, usually big enough for one person with a bit left over. but barely enough to satisfy two hungry adults. "And what would you like for the side with that?" Maria asked, her tone professional but gentle. "It comes with garlic bread or a side salad?" "Garlic bread, please," the father said quickly. It was the filling option. Maria wrote it down. "And for the children? What can I get for them?" The little boy and girl looked up. They knew the drill. They didn't ask for the pasta with the creamy sauce, and they didn't even look at the picture of the burger and fries. The boy looked at his dad, waiting for his cue. "The kids will have the tomato soup," the father said. "And can we get an extra bowl of it to share?" "Just one extra bowl?" Maria paused for just a fraction of a second. The soup was cheap, but it was mostly broth. 2 bowls of broth and a shared plate of pasta wasn't a meal. It was an appetizer for most people in this hotel. But she could see the desperation in the way the father tapped his foot on the floor in nervous rhythm. He was stretching every penny as far as it would go. "Of course," Maria said, keeping her voice light. 2 bowls of tomato soup and 1 extra bowl on the side. "And do you want bread with that, or will the garlic bread be enough for the table?" "The garlic bread will be plenty," the mother spoke up. She had a soft voice, the kind that sounded like she was apologizing for taking up space. "We're not very hungry anyway. We had a late lunch." It was a lie. Maria had watched them demolish the free bread rolls she brought out less than 10 minutes ago. She saw the way the little girl was still eyeing the crumbs on the table. They were starving, and this late lunch story was a way to save face. "All right then," Maria said, closing her book. "I'll get that order in for you right away." She walked away from the table, but the heavy feeling in her chest didn't go away. It got heavier. As she entered the bustling kitchen, the noise hit her like a wall. The chefs were shouting, pots were banging, and the smell of rich butter and grilled steak filled the air. It was a place of abundance, stark contrast to the scarcity happening at table 12. She punched the order into the computer screen. *1, chicken Alfredo. 3 tomato soups. 1 garlic bread. The ticket printed out with a loud ding asterisk. The head chef, a big man with a red face named Tony, grabbed it and glanced at it. "Table 12. Tony yelled over the noise. "Who's handling the corner booth?" "I am," Maria said. 3 soups and 1 pasta. Tony raised an eyebrow. "That's not much for a family of 4. Did they say anything else?" "No," Maria said, grabbing a jug of ice water. "They said they aren't very hungry." Tony grunted. He had seen it all before. He worked in hotels for 20 years. He knew the difference between not hungry and broke. He didn't say anything else. Just turned to the stove and started ladling red soup into white bowls. Maria waited by the counter. Wiping down counters that were already clean, her eyes drifted back to the dining room. Through the round glass porthole of the kitchen door, she could see the family. The father was leaning in close to the mother. They weren't looking at each other. They were looking down at the table. Maria could see the father's hands moving. He was stacking coins and bills on the table. He was counting. She saw a few crumpled $1 bills. She saw a handful of quarters. He was carefully making piles, counting it out twice, then sliding it all back into a messy heap in the center of the table. It was a physical act of stress. He was checking to see if he had enough to cover the check, plus the tax. And maybe, just maybe, a small tip. Maria looked away. It hurt to watch. It was too real. Her shift wasn't over, but she was already exhausted. Her own problems were waiting for her at home, the silence of an empty apartment, the pile of mail she was afraid to open. She reached into her pocket and touched the tips she had made so far. A wad of crinkled bills. She counted it quickly in her head. $42. It wasn't enough to fix her life, but it was something. It was gas money. It was money for a gallon of milk and a box of cereal. But then she looked back at the children. The little boy was whispering something to his sister. He pointed at a table across the room where a family was eating a massive chocolate lava cake with ice cream. The boy's eyes were wide, filled with that pure, simple longing that only kids have. He wasn't asking for a new toy or a trip to Disney. He just wanted something sweet. He just wanted a moment where he didn't have to worry. The father noticed the boy looking. He reached out and gently patted the boy's shoulder, shaking his head. The boy slumped back against the seat, understanding the silent no. Maria felt a sharp sting behind her eyes. She had to look down at her shoes to compose herself. She remembered being that little kid. She remembered the feeling of shame when her parents couldn't afford what the other kids had. She remembered promising herself that when she grew up, she would never be poor. And yet here she was, 30 years old, tired and counting pennies just like the man at table 12. "Order up!" Tony shouted, slamming the bell on the pass. Maria jumped. She stepped up to the counter. There was the large plate of fettuccine alfredo, steaming and smelling of cheese and cream. Next to it were 3 bowls of tomato soup, looking thin and watery, and a plate of 4 slices of garlic bread. "Hey, Maria," Tony said suddenly. He was looking at the garlic bread. "We made too much of this earlier, and it's just going to go hard in the warmer. Do me a favor. Take this extra basket." He slid a basket containing 3 more large pieces of bread, dripping with butter and garlic, toward her. "I can't take that, Tony." "Management will see," Maria whispered. Tony didn't look up from the grill. "I didn't see you take nothing. I told you to get rid of it." "Go on," Maria smiled. It was a genuine smile this time. Tony was a grump, but he had a heart. "Thanks, Tony." She grabbed the tray. It felt heavy. The smell of the garlic bread was incredible. She balanced the tray carefully and walked out of the kitchen, back into the noise of the dining room, as she approached the family. The tension seemed to roll off them in waves. They were hungry, and the food was finally here. Maria set the plates down one by one. "Here we are," she said. "1 chicken Alfredo, the tomato soups. And here's your garlic bread." She placed the plate with the 4 slices on the table. Then, with a casual movement, she slid the extra basket from under the tray and placed it right next to the boy. And like I said, Maria lied smoothly again. "We have too much bread in the kitchen tonight. You don't mind helping us out, do you?" The father stared at the extra basket. It was a lot of food. For them, this extra bread meant full bellies tonight. He looked up at Maria, and his eyes were shiny. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "That is very generous," he said. "Really?" "Thank you." "You're welcome," Maria said. "Enjoy your meal. Let me know if you need anything else." She walked away, giving them space to eat. She went to check on another table, refilling sodas for a group of businessmen who didn't even acknowledge her presence. But her mind was still in the corner. She watched from a distance as the family ate. The mother split the pasta in half carefully, ensuring she and the father got equal amounts. The children dunked their garlic bread into the tomato soup, eating with enthusiasm. The extra basket of bread was like a treasure chest to them. The mood at the table had shifted completely. The anxiety was still there, hovering like a cloud. But for a few minutes, there was warmth. There was fullness. Maria leaned against the service station, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. She was glad they were eating, but she knew this wasn't a solution. They would finish this meal, walk out into the cold night, and still be broke tomorrow. It was a temporary fix and a permanent problem. She looked at the clock on the wall. Her shift was dragging. She thought about the $42 in her pocket. She thought about the electricity bill. And then she looked at the little boy. He had finished his soup and was wiping the bowl with a piece of the extra bread, getting every last drop. He laughed at something his sister said. Maria made a decision. It was a crazy decision, maybe a stupid one. She needed that money. But she knew that money was just paper. The feeling of helping someone, of really changing a moment for them, that was real. She waited for them to finish. She watched them slow down, the plates becoming empty. The father was looking at the check that she had dropped off earlier. He was picking up the messy pile of cash on the table, counting it one last time. He didn't look satisfied. He looked worried. He was short. Maria took a deep breath. She walked back over to the table. "Is everything tasting okay for you folks?" she asked. "Delicious," the mother said. "We really appreciate it." The father looked up. He looked like he wanted to say something, maybe apologize for the small tip he was about to leave, or ask if they could stay a little longer because they had nowhere else to go. But he just nodded. Maria stood there for a second, her hand in her apron pocket, her fingers wrapped around her own tips. She squeezed the money tight. "I'll take these plates whenever you're ready," she said. The father signaled that he was done. It was time. The aftermath was about to begin. The father pushed the last few coins across the table, lining them up next to the crumpled dollar bills. It was a pathetic little pile of money. Maria could see his hand trembling slightly as he did the math for the third time. He knew, and she knew, that it wasn't going to be enough, even with the cheapest items on the menu. The tax and the automatic tip added for large parties were going to put him over the limit. He sat back in the booth, his shoulders slumping in defeat. He looked at his wife, and the look they exchanged was heavy. It was a look that said, "We tried, but we failed again." The mother reached out and squeezed his hand, offering silent comfort. The children sensed the shift in mood and went quiet, swinging their legs under the table but saying nothing. Maria stood there for a moment, her heart pounding against her ribs. She felt a sudden surge of anger, not at them, but at the situation. At the world where hard-working people couldn't even afford a bowl of soup without stress. She reached into her apron pocket. Her fingers brushed against the wad of cash she had earned through hours of running back and forth, smiling at rude customers and ignoring the pain in her feet. It was $42. It was supposed to be her grocery money for the next 2 weeks. It was supposed to keep the electricity on. "Give me 1 second," Maria said abruptly. Turning away from the table before they could see the emotion on her face, she walked quickly toward the kitchen. But she bypassed the order window. She ducked into the small employee break room where the lockers were. It was empty, save for a humming vending machine. She pulled the crumpled bills out of her pocket and smoothed them out on the bench. Washingtons, a Lincoln, and a handful of quarters. For a second she hesitated. She thought about her own empty fridge. She thought about the long walk home in the cold, because she couldn't afford bus fare this week. If she gave this money away, she was in trouble. Real trouble. But then she heard the muffled sound of the father's voice in the dining room. He was talking to the kids, telling them a joke to try and lighten the mood. He was trying to be a good dad even when he felt like a failure. That sound decided it for her. Maria straightened up, stuffed the money into her fist, and marched back out to the kitchen. She grabbed Tony, the chef, who was plating a steak. "Tony," she whispered urgently, "I need a huge favor." Tony looked at her, eyebrows raised. "What is it?" "You look like you're going to be sick." Table 12. "The family in the corner," Maria said, her voice low and fast. "I need you to comp their meal. Or rather, I need you to let me pay for it, but I don't want them to know it's me. Can you add some stuff to the ticket?" "Make it look like a mistake?" Tony looked past her, toward the dining room. He could see the family getting ready to leave. He looked back at Maria. He saw the desperation in her eyes, but he also saw the kindness. He shook his head slowly. "You're a fool, kid," he grumbled, but there was a softness in his gruff voice. "I can't comp the whole meal. The manager checks the logs. But, look, we had a system error earlier. A few appetizers got voided by accident. I can make it look like their order got mixed up in it." He moved fast. Tony grabbed a clean plate and piled 2 massive slices of chocolate cake onto it, the good stuff with the fudge sauce. Then he grabbed 2 large to-go cups and filled them with hot chocolate and whipped cream from the beverage station. "Here," Tony said, thrusting the cake and cups at her. "Tell them the cakes were falling apart so they couldn't be served, and the hot chocolate was extra from the machine. And take this." He reached into his own pocket and pulled out a $20 bill, shoving it at Maria. "Hey, don't argue. Just put it toward the bill. I've got 3 kids at home. I can't watch that happen." Maria stared at him, stunned. She took the 20 and added it to her own $42. Now she had $62. It was more than enough. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." "Go on," Tony shooed her away. "Before I change my mind?" Maria took a deep breath, picked up the tray with the cakes and hot chocolates, and walked back toward table 12. She felt shaky, like she was walking on a tightrope. Her palms were sweating. This was it. The moment she broke the rules, but maybe fixed something important. She arrived at the table just as the father was standing up. He looked nervous. He was holding the small pile of cash out to her, ready to face the embarrassment of coming up short. "Miss, here's the payment," he said, his voice low. I think it should cover most of it. I can run to the ATM nearby for the rest, if needed." Maria ignored the outstretched hand. Instead, she set the heavy tray down on the table with a soft thud. The smell of rich chocolate hit the table instantly. The children gasped. "What is this?" the mother asked, her eyes wide. The little girl stared at the slice of cake like it was gold. Is that for us?" Maria put on her best acting face. She smiled brightly, forcing herself to look relaxed and casual. She said, tapping the side of the tray. "We have a bit of a situation in the kitchen. Tony the chef, he's in a bit of a mood because the new guy dropped a tray of these chocolate cakes earlier. They didn't look perfect enough for the fancy hotel guests, so he was going to throw them out. Can you believe that? Wasting perfectly good cake?" She paused for effect, looking at the family. "I couldn't let that happen. I told him I knew a family who would appreciate them much more than the stuffy businessmen out there. And these hot chocolates. The machine made too much foam, so we had extra." The father looked from Maria to the cake, and then back to the money in his hand. He lowered his hand slowly, completely confused. "But the bill," he stammered. "We need to pay." Maria waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, don't worry about that right now. Tony said he has to fix the ticket anyway because of a computer error with the order entry. I think he might have accidentally voided the soups or something. It's a whole mess back there. Just enjoy the cake. I hate to see good food go in the trash, especially when there are kids sitting right here." The little boy didn't wait for permission. He picked up a spoon, his eyes locked on the cake. He looked at his dad one last time. "Go ahead, son," the father whispered, his voice cracking. The kids dug in. For the first time all night, the table exploded with noise. It was the happy noise of chocolate being tasted, of spoons clinking against glasses, of laughter. The little girl got whipped cream on her nose, and the mother laughed at genuine. A beautiful sound that made Maria's chest ache in a good way. The father looked at Maria. He didn't say anything for a long time. He just looked at her, his eyes swimming with tears. He saw past the uniform. He saw that she knew. He knew she was lying about the mess-up. But he also knew that accepting the truth would be too embarrassing for him right now. He accepted the kindness with the grace of a man who had hit bottom and just found a rope to hold on to. "You didn't have to do this," he said softly. Leaning toward her, "It's just cake," Maria said, shrugging like it was nothing. "But I think you guys needed it more than the trash can did." He reached out and gently squeezed her arm. It was a firm grip, filled with gratitude. "You are a good person." "Thank you, really." Maria felt her face get hot. She looked down at her shoes. "I'm just doing my job." She turned away quickly before the tears could spill out of her own eyes. She walked back to the server station, her legs feeling weak. She watched them from a distance. The atmosphere had completely transformed. The anxiety was gone, replaced by a moment of pure joy. The parents were relaxing, watching their kids enjoy a treat they hadn't expected in a million years. Maria felt a warmth spread through her. That had nothing to do with the restaurant heating. She knew she would have to walk home tonight. She knew she would have to figure out how to eat tomorrow. But looking at that family, seeing the relief on the father's face, she knew she had made the right choice. For the first time in a long time, Maria didn't feel poor. She felt rich. She picked up a coffee pot and headed to another table, a real smile on her face. The chocolate cake didn't last long. The children devoured it with a speed that only comes from not eating enough, scraping their spoons against the white ceramic plates to get every last bit of fudge sauce. Even the mother and father took a few bites, savoring the sweetness like it was a rare luxury. For 20 minutes, the heavy cloud of worry that hung over the corner booth seemed to lift. The family laughed. The father leaned back, his arm draped across the back of the booth. Looking at his wife with a softness that hadn't been there when they first walked in, Maria stayed busy, wiping down tables and refilling coffee for other guests, but her eyes kept drifting back to them. She felt a strange mix of relief and nervousness. The relief came from seeing them happy. The nervousness came from the inevitable end of the meal. She knew the moment was coming. The bill. The check had been sitting on the table for a while, tucked under the ketchup bottle. Every time the father shifted in his seat, his eyes flicked toward it. He knew what was on it. He knew the math was tight. Maria had told him Tony was fixing a computer error, but you could tell he wasn't fully convinced. He was a man used to things going wrong. He was waiting for the other shoe to drop. Finally, the little girl pushed her plate away and let out a small sigh, signaling she was full. The father looked at his watch, then at his wife. They shared a nod. It was time. The father picked up the check holder. He opened it and stared at the slip of paper inside. He stared for a long time. He picked up the pen, then put it down. He did some quick tapping on the table with his fingers. Maria took a deep breath. It was time to execute the rest of the plan. She walked over to the table, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had done the math in her head 3 times. The total bill, even with the shared pasta and soups, came to about $45 with tax. The money she had in her pocket, or tips plus Tony's 20, was $62. It was enough to cover it and leave a little over. "Is everything okay?" she asked, stopping at the edge of the table. "Can I get that out of your way?" The father looked up. His expression was complicated. He looked confused, but he also looked incredibly relieved. He held the check out to her. The total. "It seems a bit lower than I calculated," he said, his voice tentative. "Did I read it right?" Maria kept her face neutral. She didn't look at the check. She didn't want to know if Tony had actually managed to void the items, or if he had just written a fake number on a guest check. She just needed the transaction to be over. "We had some issues with the ordering system earlier," Maria lied smoothly, reaching out to take the check folder. "It happens sometimes. If the price looks off, it's probably just the system correcting itself." The father hesitated. He looked at the small pile of cash he had ready crumpled bills and coins. It looked like enough to cover what he was seeing on the paper. He looked at the empty cake plates, then back at Maria. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I don't want to cause any trouble. I can pay the full amount." Maria forced a laugh, trying to keep it light. "Trust me, the computer is the last thing you want to argue with tonight. It's been a nightmare. Just pay what it says." He seemed to accept this. He carefully counted out the bills, making sure every dollar was there. Then he took the coins and stacked them neatly on top. It was the entirety of the cash he had. He wasn't holding anything back. "Here you go," he said, handing it to her. Maria took the money. It felt warm, like it had been sitting in his pocket close to his body. She took his money, his last $40, and slipped it into her apron pocket. Then, pretending to count it at the table, she reached into the other side of her apron, where her own tip money and Tony's 20 were waiting. She pulled out a $10 bill and 2 ones. She slid the $12 back into the check folder, along with a receipt. "Here is your change," she said, placing it on the table. The father looked at the change. He looked at Maria. He reached out and took the 2 $1 bills. He pushed the $10 bill back toward her. "This is for you," he said firmly. Maria froze. "Sir, you don't have to?" "Yes, I do," he interrupted. He stood up slowly, buttoning his worn jacket. His wife stood up next to him, gathering the kids. "We came in here feeling pretty low. You treated us like we were kings. You didn't look down on us. That matters. That matters more than you know." Maria looked at the $10. It was her tips. It was his money going back into her pocket. It felt circular and strange, but she saw the pride in his eyes. He needed to leave this table feeling like he had paid his way. He needed to leave a tip to prove to himself that he could still provide, even if it was just a little bit. "Thank you," Maria said softly, accepting the bill. "I really appreciate it." The children slid out of the booth. They were full, happy, and buzzing with sugar energy. The little girl looked at Maria and hid behind her mother's leg, shy all of a sudden. "Thank you for the cake," the little boy said politely. "You're very welcome," Maria said. "You guys have a good night." The father didn't move immediately. He looked around the restaurant, taking one last look at the warm lights and the clean tables. Then he looked at Maria, his eyes intense and serious. "What you did tonight. Telling us about the computer error and giving the kids that cake. He lowered his voice so the kids wouldn't hear. "We've been living in our car for 2 weeks. We lost everything in a fire last month. We haven't had a hot meal like this since before it happened." Maria felt the air leave her lungs. She hadn't known. She had suspected they were struggling but living in a car. The weight of it hit her hard. She didn't know what to say. "I'm so sorry." "Don't be," he said, reaching out and shaking her hand. His grip was strong, his hand calloused and rough. "You gave us a memory tonight. You gave the kids a night where they felt like everything was normal. You didn't just give us food. You gave us dignity." He squeezed her hand one last time and let go. "People like you are rare. Don't ever change." "Bye," the mother added, giving Maria a tired but genuine smile. She herded the children toward the exit, the kids clutching their coats. Maria stood there by the table watching them walk away. She watched the father hold the door open for his family. They stepped out into the cold night air, disappearing into the darkness. The restaurant was still noisy. The buzz of conversation, the clinking of glasses, the shouting from the kitchenette all came rushing back in. But Maria felt like she was in a bubble. She cleared the table slowly. She picked up the napkins, wiped up the few crumbs of cake left behind, and stacked the plates. Her movements were automatic. She felt drained, emotionally and physically. She walked back to the kitchen to drop off the dirty dishes. Tony was there, plating a steak. He looked at her, his eyes searching her face. "They gone?" he asked. "Yeah," Maria said. "They're gone. Did it work? Did they pay?" Maria nodded. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the cash. She separated Tony's $20 and pushed it across the stainless steel counter toward him. "Here, you gave me this." It helped. Tony didn't take the money. He looked at it, then at her. "Keep it," he said. "The bill was less than we thought." "Just keep it." "Can't," Maria said. "You have a family." "So do you," Tony said, turning back to the grill. "Buy yourself some groceries." "You look like a skeleton kid." Maria stared at his back, then at the money. She shoved it back into her pocket. "Thanks, Tony." She walked out of the kitchen and clocked out. Her shift was over. Usually, this was the best part of the day, the moment she could take off her heavy apron and leave. But tonight, she felt strange. She went to her locker, grabbed her coat, and put it on. The restaurant was still busy, the late-night crowd coming in. She didn't say goodbye to anyone. She just wanted to be outside. She walked out the front doors of the hotel. The air was biting cold, nipping at her nose and ears. It was the kind of cold that made you shiver instantly. She wrapped her coat tight around her and looked down the street. She thought about the family. Where were they right now? Were they walking to their car? Were they warm enough? She remembered the father saying they had been living in a car for 2 weeks. A wave of guilt washed over her. She had given them one good meal, but tomorrow they would wake up in a cold car again. She hadn't fixed their problem. She had just fed them for one night. Maria started walking toward the bus stop. Then she stopped. She remembered she didn't have enough for the bus. She had given her money to the table. She had the $12 change and the $10 tip in her pocket, but she needed that for food for the week. She groaned in frustration and kicked a small stone on the sidewalk. "Great job, Maria," she whispered to herself. "You're a hero, but you're an idiot." She shoved her hands deep into her pockets and began the long walk home. The streetlights flickered overhead as she walked, casting long shadows on the empty sidewalk. Her feet throbbed with every step, and the cold wind stung her eyes. She tried to focus on the feeling of the father's handshake. "You gave us dignity." It was a nice thought. It was a warm thought. But as she walked past the closed shops and dark storefronts, reality crept back in. She was still broke. She was still tired. She was still alone. She reached her apartment building, a brick complex that looked more like a prison than a home. She trudged up the 3 flights of stairs because the elevator was broken again. When she unlocked her door and stepped inside, the apartment was freezing. She hadn't left the heat on to save money. She flicked on the light. The bulb flickered and buzzed, casting a dim yellow light over the small space. There was the pile of mail on the counter, mocking her. She dropped her bag on the floor and didn't even bother to take off her coat. She walked over to the window and looked out at the street below, wondering where that family was parked. she stayed there for a long time. Watching the cars pass by, feeling the cold seep in through the glass, she closed her eyes and whispered a prayer to no one in particular, hoping that somehow, somewhere, they were okay, and then she went to bed, exhausted. Hoping for a better tomorrow, the next 2 days were a blur of gray skies and routine misery. Maria went back to work, kept her head down, and did her job. The highlight of her shift was usually a free soda or a kind word from Tony in the kitchen. The money she had in her purse was already gone. The $12 in change had bought a loaf of bread, some peanut butter, and a half-gallon of milk. The $10 tip from the father had gone straight to the gas company to keep them from shutting off the heat. She was back to square one, broke. Tired, she walked into the hotel restaurant on Friday evening, her feet already aching before her shift even started. The place was buzzing, but it felt different. There was an energy in the air, a sense of excitement that Maria usually associated with weddings or big conventions. She walked to the back to clock in, ignoring the whispers of the other staff members. "Is that her?" "Yeah, that's the one. I heard he's looking for her." Maria didn't pay attention. Gossip was common in the restaurant business. People were always looking for someone, a manager, looking for a server who messed up, a waiter looking for a ride home. She assumed it was nothing. She clocked in and tied her apron strings tight around her waist. She grabbed a coffee pot and headed out to the floor. As she walked past the front desk, Jessica, the hostess, grabbed her arm. Her eyes were wide. "Maria, where have you been?" Jessica asked, breathless. "Getting changed?" "I just walked in," Maria said, confused. "What's going on?" "The manager has been looking for you." "He's in the office," Jessica said, pointing toward the back. "And there's a guy out here asking for you specifically." "A guy in a really nice suit?" "He said he's been waiting for 2 hours. Maria felt a cold chill run down her spine. A guy in a suit? Waiting for her? She racked her brain. Had she forgotten a table? Did she owe someone money? Her heart began to hammer against her ribs. "I don't know who that is," Maria stammered. "He said he knows you helped his family," Jessica whispered. "Is that the guy from the other night? The one with the kids?" Maria froze. The family. The father. She looked toward the lobby. Standing near the entrance was a tall man in a sharp, charcoal gray suit. He looked different, healthier, cleaner, confident. But when he turned his head, she recognized him. It was the same man who had counted out coins on the table 2 nights ago. But before she could walk out to him, the manager, Mr. Henderson, stepped out of his office. He looked annoyed. "Maria, there you are," he barked. "Get in here now." Maria felt her stomach drop. This was it. She was fired. She had accepted the money improperly, or maybe the camera had seen her give away the cake. Or maybe the credit card the father had used. Wait, he hadn't used a card. He had used cash. So what was the problem? She walked into the small, cramped office. Mr. Henderson sat down behind his desk, which was covered in paperwork. He didn't look angry, exactly. He looked baffled. "Sit down," he said. Maria sat on the edge of the hard plastic chair. "Am I in trouble, sir?" "Trouble?" "No," Mr. Henderson said, sighing. "I'm confused. There is a man out there, insists. His name is Mr. Thompson. He is demanding to speak to you. He says he owes you a debt." "He was a customer," Maria said quietly. "On Tuesday, they didn't have much money. I just helped them out a little." "Helped them out how?" Mr. Henderson asked. "Because this man is waving a checkbook around and talking about making a donation in your name. I can't have you taking money from customers, Maria. It's against policy." Maria felt tears prick her eyes. "I didn't take anything, I swear. I paid for part of their meal with my own tips. And Tony gave them some cake that was going to be thrown away. That's all." Mr. Henderson stared at her. He rubbed his chin. "You paid for their meal? With your tips?" "Yes, sir." They looked hungry. And they had kids. Mr. Henderson leaned back in his chair. He was a tough boss, usually only caring about the bottom line, but he wasn't a monster. He looked at the thin girl sitting in front of him, wearing worn-out shoes and a uniform that was too big for her. "Get out there," he said suddenly. What? Get out there, Mr. Henderson repeated, waving his hand toward the door. Talk to him. Whatever you did, it made a big impression. Just don't make a scene in the lobby. Maria stood up, her legs shaky. She walked out of the office and into the lobby. The man in the gray suit saw her immediately. His face broke into a huge smile. He walked toward her, his hand outstretched. You, he said, his voice booming. I was hoping I'd catch you, Mr. Thompson, Maria said, feeling small in his presence. Is everything okay? Did I do something wrong? He laughed, a warm, genuine sound. Wrong? No, you did everything right. I tried to find you on Tuesday night, but the hostess said you had already left. I've been coming back every shift since. Maria just stared at him. But why? Because of what you did for us, Mr. Thompson said, his voice dropping to a serious tone. I told you we lost everything. I wasn't lying. My business went under, the house burned down, and we were living in our car. We were at the end of our rope. I hadn't eaten in 2 days so the kids could have something. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick white envelope. He held it out to her. I can't take this, Maria said, putting her hands up. I didn't do it for a reward. I know you didn't, he said firmly. And that is exactly why you have to take it. That night, after we left, I sat in the car and I watched my kids sleeping with full bellies. For the first time in months, they weren't cold and they weren't hungry. It gave me the strength to keep going. The next morning, I went to a job interview I had been dreading. I walked in with my head held high because I knew I wasn't a failure. I was a father who had just taken care of his family. Maria lowered her hands slowly. You got the job? I got the job, he smiled. It's a construction project, rebuilding a part of the downtown district. It pays well. They gave me an advance on my first check so we could get into a motel. He pushed the envelope toward her again. This is part of that advance. It's $3,000. $3,000. Maria gasped. The room started to spin. That was rent for a year. That was a used car. That was a lifesaver. Please, Mr. Thompson said. Take it. Pay your bills. Buy yourself a good meal. You saved us, Maria, in more ways than one. Just let me do this for you. Tears spilled over Maria's cheeks. She looked at the envelope, then at the kind man in front of her. It didn't feel real. It felt like a dream. But the warmth in his eyes was real. She took the envelope. It felt heavy in her hand. Thank you, she whispered. I don't know what to say. Just say you'll use it to take care of yourself, he said. Maria wiped her eyes. I will, I promise. Mr. Thompson wasn't done. He reached into his other pocket and pulled out a business card. Also, my brother-in-law runs a logistics company downtown. They are looking for a receptionist. It's office work. Day shift, benefits, insurance. He handed her the card. I told him about you. He wants you to call him. You start Monday if you want it. Maria looked at the card. It was a real offer. A way out. A future. I don't know what to say, she stammered. You don't have to say anything, Mr. Thompson said. He gently touched her shoulder. You were an angel when we needed one. Now, let someone be an angel for you. He turned and walked toward the door, pausing only to wave at the kids who were waiting in a taxi outside. The kids who looked clean, fed, and happy now. Maria stood in the middle of the hotel lobby, clutching the envelope and the business card. The other staff members were staring. She didn't care. Mr. Henderson walked out of the office, saw the envelope in her hand, and just shook his head with a small smile. Well, he said, I guess you can go home early tonight. Maria looked at him, then back at the door where Mr. Thompson had disappeared. She looked at the heavy white envelope in her hand. For the first time in her life, the weight in her hand didn't feel like a burden. It felt like hope. She walked out of the hotel, but this time she didn't head toward the bus stop to count her change. She hailed a taxi. She had enough for a ride home. And for the first time in a long time, the future didn't look scary. It looked bright. She got into the taxi, and as it drove away, she whispered a thank you to the universe, grateful that she had trusted her heart, even when her wallet was empty. The aftermath wasn't just unreal, it was a miracle.